Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 267. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Thank you for tuning in and joining me. I'm going to do something a little different today because this is a holiday week and we just finished months of a presidential campaign where it's been nothing but politics every week, and that's all I've been talking about. I want to step away from politics today, and I want to do some history. If you don't know, I'm a huge history buff. I love history and studying history. And in this podcast today, and I'll also have a podcast on Friday, I am going to do a deep dive into the story of Thanksgiving and the lore around and what we think about as Thanksgiving and what we are taught about this holiday and what it represents and the reality of what this holiday is. I'm going to be covering a lot of history. We're going to go back into Europe because this history starts in Europe. You have to understand what's going on in Europe and who the people from Europe are that come to North America, who colonize North America, who set up the colonies that eventually become the United States of America. And I want to tell that story. I'm going to be covering a lot of history and I'm not going to be able to get to everything. Of course, I'm going to be telling 200 years of history in 2 hours, an hour today and an hour on Friday. So it's going to be impossible for me to cover everything, but I'm just going to tell a story and I'm going to highlight the parts of this history that I think are very, very important, very significant. Some of it you may know. Some of it is going to be things that you don't know and that you've never heard before. And I'm going to be putting that all together. So with no delay, let's get right into today's podcast. When we think about Thanksgiving, this is the image that we think about and the feast that we think about, because this is what has been taught to us about the first Thanksgiving that happened in Puritan New England. And this was the first colony, English colony in the New World. And these Puritan settlers were having a feast with the natives, and everything was all jolly and happy. And this was the beginning of the roots of the United States of America. This first Thanksgiving feast with the Puritans and the natives most likely never happened. But this is the lore and what we are taught about the story of Thanksgiving and why we celebrate Thanksgiving. But the first colony in the United States, or in North America, the first colony that would become the United States is not Puritan Plymouth, New England colony. The very first colony established in the United States is established further south in Virginia, and that is the early parts of American history that people don't really know about. People don't really understand about the Jamestown colony and the Virginia colony, because when people think about the founding of the United States, they're always told this story about the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving and the Indians and showing them how to plant food, and they had this feast and all this stuff. This again most likely never happened. But the Puritans and the New England colony, the Plymouth colony, was not the first colony. The very first colony was Jamestown, and we're going to talk about Jamestown today, and then we'll get into talking about Plymouth. in our next podcast. But today's podcast, we're going to focus on Jamestown, because I think people need to understand about Jamestown, because people don't know. Sorry. God, I can't believe I don't have any water. I usually have water standing by. But anyway, we're going to make it work. Thanksgiving. This is the Wikipedia page. Thanksgiving is a national holiday celebrated on various dates in October and November in the United States, in Canada, St. Lucia, Liberia, unofficially in countries like Brazil, Germany, and the Philippines. It is also observed in the Australian territory of Norfolk Island. It began as a day of giving thanks for blessings of the harvest and of the preceding year, the blessings of the harvest and for the preceding year. Various similarity names in harvest festivals, holidays occurred throughout the world. So various similarly named harvest festivals, holidays all over the world. They have harvest festival holidays. But Thanksgiving uniquely has historical roots in religious and cultural traditions. It has also long been celebrated as a secular holiday as well, which you don't need to say that. You've already said that it is celebrated all over the world. Of course, it has some secular origins as well, but in the United States, it is religious and cultural traditions that that we tie to the Thanksgiving holiday. So let's get into the history of this Thanksgiving holiday. Prayers of thanks and special Thanksgiving ceremonies are common amongst religions after harvest and other times of year. The Thanksgiving holidays history in North America is rooted in English traditions dating from the Protestant Reformation. Let me read that sentence again. The Thanksgiving holidays history in North America is rooted in English traditions dating back from the Protestant Reformation. It also has aspects of harvest festivals, even though the harvest in New England occurs before the late November date on which the modern Thanksgiving holiday is celebrated. In the English tradition, days of Thanksgiving, a special Thanksgiving religious service became important during the English Reformation. There it is again. Protestant Reformation, English Reformation, the Reformation. In the reign of Henry VIII. We're going to talk about Henry VIII here in a moment. Before 1536, there was 95 church holidays plus 52 Sundays when people were required to attend church and forego work. Read that again. Before 1536, there were 95 church holidays. What kind of church? Before 1536, what happens in 1536? 1536 is when Henry leaves the Catholic Church and England leaves the Catholic Church, and he establishes the Church of England. But 1536, so before 1536, when Henry does that, there were 95 Catholic church holidays plus 52 Sundays when people were required to attend church and forego work. Though through the 1536 reforms in the Church of England reduced the number of holidays in the liturgical calendar to 27. The Puritan party of the Anglican Church wished to eliminate all church holidays apart from the weekly Lord's Day, including evangelicals' feasts of Christmas and Easter. So the Church of England, people in England that embraced the Church of England and they wanted to separate from Catholicism, they wanted to reduce some of these church holidays that were associated with Catholicism. It says the holidays were to be replaced by specifically called days of fasting and days of Thanksgiving. The holidays were to be replaced by specifically called days of fasting and days of Thanksgiving in response to the events that the Puritans viewed as act of special providence. Unexpected disasters and threats of judgment from on high called for days of fasting. So this gives you some of the origins of where Thanksgiving comes from. It was more associated in England with the Church of England, and it was part of the Reformation, part of changing from these liturgical holidays that are on the Catholic calendar. As we're separating from Catholicism, we want our own holidays, and this is the origins of the days of Thanksgiving, the days of fasting. Now, to tell the story of the origins of the United States and the first colonies that founded the United States, and there was two, and the theme that I want to focus on is that the founding of these two colonies, the Virginia colony and the Plymouth colony, it has those two colonies and the purpose of those two colonies and the beginnings of those two colonies and where those two colonies were located on the map. They begin a thread, a principle in these English colonies that last in America. That is a thread and a principle and a theme of what it means to be an American today. Two colonies, two different principles. I'm going to get to those as we go, but you have to understand these different colonies and the different people that migrated to those colonies and where they came from. So to tell the story about the origins of the United States and the origins of these colonies, you have to go back to Europe, which we're going to do, and we're going to go back to the 16th century, because the 16th century is probably the most, or one of the most pivotal and transformative centuries in recorded human history, the 16th century. So much transformative stuff happens in the 16th century that takes us from the old world into the modern world. And it all happens in the 16th century. And there are some very, very prominent figures that bring about this transformation in Europe, talking about Western civilization and the birth of modernity happening in this century. There's many prominent figures, but I want to focus on three, and it is the three most powerful kings that are in Europe at this time. And we've already mentioned one, King Henry VIII. Henry VIII of the House of Tudor was the King of England. And then Francis I was the King of France, and Charles V. Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, I want you to notice the dates of when these guys are born. Well, let's go to Christopher Columbus. When did Christopher Columbus sail across the Atlantic and discover the New World, discover North America? When did Christopher Columbus make that sail? Well, if you know the rhyme, it is in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. 1492. So, 1492, 8 years later, you're crossing over from the 15th century into the 16th century. So 8 years from the time that Columbus sailed the ocean blue to discover what would become the New World. You're 8 years from the turn of the century going into the 16th century. Okay? 8 years. Henry, look at when Henry was born. Henry VIII was born 1491. He was born a year before Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Henry takes the throne and becomes King of England in 1509. So Henry is 19 years old, and he becomes king in the beginning of the 15th century in 1509. Francis is born 1494. So 3 years after Columbus sailed the ocean blue, discovered the New World, Francis is born in 1494, and Francis becomes King of France in 1515. So he is 21 years old, or what is that? That would be 22 years old when he becomes king in 1515. It's 6 years after Henry is king, Francis becomes king. So these guys are contemporaries. They're rivals. They're the most powerful kings in England. Francis I, Henry VIII, and Charles V. Charles V is interesting because Charles V is the Holy Roman Emperor. Hegelius Romanische Reich. So this is where the word Reich comes from. When you hear people talking about the First Reich, the Second Reich, the Third Reich, the Fourth Reich, the Nazis were the Third Reich. People have speculated about the Fourth Reich. We know for sure the First Reich was Otto the Great. The Second Reich was Wilhelm, and Wilhelm bringing the German regions together. So that's where we get the word Reich. Hegelius Romanische Reich, the Holy Roman Empire, and Charles V was the Holy Roman Empire. And look at when he's born, 1500. He's the baby of the group. He's born 1500, 9 years after Henry, 6 years after Francis, and he takes the throne in 1519. He's 19 years old when Charles V becomes not only the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Emperor only speaks to what is Germany. Charles becomes not only the king of Germany, he becomes the king of Spain. He becomes the king of the Netherlands. He becomes. Let me just show you. I think there's a picture here of all of what Charles V. This everything in green. Naples, Spain, Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Hungary. All of this was part of Charles's realm. He was the king of all of this. Another interesting thing about Charles is that he was born in Flanders. So this gives you some of the mindset and the thinking during the divine right of kings and the absolute power of the European kings. Charles was born in Flanders, and Flanders is a province of France. France. And so Francis and Charles hated each other. They hated each other. They were contemporaries, and they would always battle each other. And Francis would always joke, and I mean, he wasn't joking. He was serious about it when he would say, but he would always tell Charles, "You're my subject. You have to do what I say because you were born in Flanders. You were born in my realm. Just because you were born in the kingdom of France, born in my realm, that makes you my subject." That's the feudal mindset that these people had. That if you were born in my realm and born in my kingdom, that automatically made you my subject. And being someone's subject is slavery. that you are my subject. You are my slave. This is a concept that carries over when the colonial period, because that's what colonies are. That's what a colony is that what the king says in England, that it goes to all of his colonies. The word colony comes from the same word colon. Whatever goes in the mouth comes out of the colon. That the king's mouth speaks to all the colonies. So this was a concept that led to the American Revolution, is this concept that the people in the colonies in the United States, they were the subjects of the king. And so that's because Charles was born in Flanders, Francis I said that, look, little boy, you're my subject. But the kingdom that Charles ruled over was a lot larger than Francis' kingdom, because he not only inherited Spain, Naples, Germany, Hungary, Austria, the Netherlands, but he also inherited the New World. Because when Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, he was taking that voyage under the commission of Charles I's grandparents, or Charles V's grandparents, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Ferdinand and Isabella are the ones who set Columbus on his voyage, and Ferdinand and Isabella were Charles V's grandparents. Charles V, his birth, and this is something that was very common with the Spanish and in England altogether, that they would use marriage to combine kingdoms together, to keep land and wealth in the family. And Charles V was a creation in some sorts, and that he was meant to inherit all of this land that he inherited. And he was the most, out of all of these kings, Henry, Francis, Charles V was the most powerful, hands down, because he had so much land in his realm that he controlled as the monarch. Says here, it's really interesting. It says, the personal union of the European and American territories he ruled was the first collection of realms labeled the empire on which the sun never sets. Now, remember, they said this about England. When England gets on the scene and it starts to colonize the rest of the world and go to India and come to the Americas and everywhere else that the British went. When the British were at their heyday, people said this about the British Empire, that it was the empire where the sun never sets, about the British Empire. But the first empire where the sun never sets before the British Empire was the empire of Charles IV. I have a video here that explains a little bit about Charles IV and his creation. Take a listen.
In the thought bubble. Charles's parents came from two ambitious dynasties. His mother, Juana, was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, whom you've probably heard of. And from Juana, Charles laid claim not only to Spain, but to parts of Italy, including Naples and Sicily, as well as what became known as the Americas. Charles's father was the Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Fair, and through Philip, Charles could claim the German lands of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, Philip's father. So Charles's existence was pretty much a genetic engineering job designed to produce a ruler of Spain and Germany. Only Charles was neither Spanish nor German himself. He grew up in Belgium in the Dukedom of Burgundy, which technically made him a French subject. And ruling
a French subject. Doing this, combining kingdoms and realms for power through marriage is something that was very common, especially in France, because that's what Aragon and Castile did. They married together Ferdinand and Isabella to join the powers of Aragon and Castile, and so they could, rid Spain and from the Moors, and they go and they do the Reconquistador, reconquer Spain from the Moors after on the period of Andalus. But this marriage was an arranged marriage to join the powers of Castile and Aragon. So this was very common. So the Duke of Burgundy, who is the grandson of Maximilian of Germany, bringing this union together with the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella to create Charles V. I mean, it was common practice in Europe and very much so amongst the Spanish. So Charles becomes the ruler of Germany. He becomes the ruler again of Austria. He becomes the ruler of Hungary, Netherlands, Naples, all of the Americas, because at this time, after his grandparents die, then they start establishing the Spanish colonies in Mexico, the missions of Cortez and Coronado and all of these Spanish conquistadors that came to the Americas, conquering the Americas. They all did so under Charles V. Charles V. Now, Charles V's mother, Joanna's parents were Ferdinand and Isabella. But Joanna had a sister, and Joanna's sister was Catherine of Aragon. And Catherine of Aragon was married to Henry VIII. Now, Henry VIII, when Catherine of let me just take a step back. Catherine of Aragon, who is the sister of Charles V, that would make Charles V Catherine of Aragon's nephew. You understand where we're at? So Catherine of Aragon married to Henry VIII of England, and Charles V, who we just finished talking about, is the most powerful king in Europe. He has an empire on which the sun never sets. He is the nephew of Catherine of Aragon. Now, when Catherine of Aragon married Henry VIII, she wasn't supposed to be marrying Henry VIII. When they first made this deal, actually Henry VII, Henry VIII's father, he was king of England before Henry VIII. Henry VII made this deal to wed his first son, Arthur, to Catherine the Great. Catherine of Aragon. And Arthur ends up dying. And then after Arthur dies, instead of sending Catherine back to Spain, Henry VII just says, well, why don't you marry my second son, Henry VIII? Why don't you just marry him? And he sets this up to where his second son, who wasn't betrothed to her, ends up marrying Catherine of Aragon because the first son dies. Now, when Henry VII does this, this went against Catholic law for Henry VII to just replace Arthur with Henry VIII and marry Cat. So that was against Catholic law. But Henry VII, he makes a deal with the Pope and gets the Pope to sign off on this so Henry VIII can marry Catherine of Aragon. So that gives you a little insight that a lot of people don't know when they tell this story, is that Henry VII had already made a deal for the Pope to look the other way and to go against what the rules of the church said to allow Henry to marry Catherine of Aragon and have the church's sanction on it. So that's just let you know that that there was some when everyone knows what happens later. We've already talked about it, but we're going to talk more about it here. But there's some precedent in Henry VIII's mind that the Pope can just, if the Pope wants to, that the Pope can make exceptions for what the rules of the church are, because the Pope had made this exception for him to marry the woman who his brother was betrothed to after his brother died. So the Pope had already made this exception for Henry to marry Catherine. And then after Henry married Catherine, Henry didn't understand that he was in control of the sex of his offspring with Catherine, and she had several children. Many of them died early on in their infancy, and it was for there to be infancy death in this period of time was very common. Children didn't always live to adulthood, and she had children that didn't live to adulthood. And finally, she had a daughter, and the couple of the children that she had that didn't survive were daughters as well. One son didn't survive, but then she has a daughter with Henry, and that daughter does survive. But Henry's angry at Catherine the Great why do I keep calling her Catherine the Great? Catherine the Great's in Russia. Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon, that Catherine would not bear him any sons that were survived because Henry was thinking about Henry the Ninth. Henry wanted to have a male heir, not necessarily a Henry the Ninth, but he wanted to have a male heir that he would leave the kingdom of England to when he died. So he was really concerned with that. And he was upset with Catherine because Catherine kept having girls, and he wanted a son. So then he starts having an affair behind Catherine's back with Anne Boleyn. He wants to divorce Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn. And since the Pope had already made concessions for him to marry Catherine the Great, it was against, Catholic law for Henry to marry the woman who his brother was betrothed to, but the Pope signed off on it. Henry sought a divorce from the Pope, and even though it was against Catholic law for him to divorce Catherine of Aragon, he wanted the Pope to do as the Pope had done for him to marry her. He sought an annulment, and he wanted the Pope to sign off so he could marry his mistress, Anne Boleyn. But there was a problem. There was an issue. And a lot of people don't know about this, that when Henry sent word to the Pope at that time, who was Clement VII, and to request an annulment, it was at a time when Rome was under attack and being sacked, and the Pope Clement VII, was a prisoner on house arrest. And the person who was sacking Rome, the person who was keeping Pope Clement VII under house arrest, was Charles V, the nephew of Catherine of Aragon. So Henry sends word to Rome, and he's requesting that the Pope give him an annulment so he can marry his mistress, Anne Boleyn. And at the same time, the Pope was being imprisoned by Catherine of Aragon's nephew. There's something else you should understand that took place in the early part of the 16th century that, and we've already been talking about this. We talked about this as far as the origins of the Thanksgiving holiday, and that is the Protestant movement, which started in 1517. The sack of Rome is in 1527. So Martin Luther in Germany is a realm of Charles V. In Germany is where the Protestant Reformation starts, in Wittenberg. And in 1517, Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses on the wall there in Wittenberg, and that is what starts the Protestant Reformation there in Germany. So let's listen to this clip about the sack of Rome in 1527.
In the heart of the 16th century, Europe was a boiling cauldron of religious and political turmoil. On May 6, 1527, Rome, the eternal city and the spiritual heart of the Catholic Church, was plunged into a nightmare of violence and chaos that would leave an indelible mark on history. The sack of Rome, as it came to be known, was a brutal event that exposed the deep-seated tensions and corruption within the Catholic Church and the wider European society. This essay will explore the events leading up to the sack of Rome, the horrors that unfolded during the 8 months of pillage and destruction, and the long-lasting impact it had on the Catholic Church and the Protestant Reformation. The seeds of the sack of Rome were sown in the ill-disciplined, famished, and unpaid troops of Emperor Charles V. These soldiers, who had already defeated King Francis I of France and crossed the Alps, were now at large in northern Italy, hungry and desperate. Leading this ragtag army was the Constable de Bourbon, a French nobleman who had turned against his own king and joined the imperial forces. The core of this army was made up of landsknecht German mercenaries, known for their ferocity and lack of discipline. As they marched through Italy, the defenders of the cities they encountered heard a chilling cry that would soon strike fear across Europe, the roaring "Hoch, hoch" of the charging German infantry. These landsknecht, many of whom were Protestants, had a deep-seated disdain for the Catholic Church.
Listen to that. That's very important. That Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, the Catholic Emperor, was using Protestant mercenaries to sack Rome. Take a listen to this.
Italy, the defenders of the cities they encountered heard a chilling cry that would soon strike fear across Europe, the roaring "Hoch, hoch" of the charging German infantry. These landsknecht, many of whom were Protestants, had a deep-seated disdain for the Catholic Church, which they saw as a corrupt and heretical institution. However, their primary motivation was greed. They had been promised the chance to plunder and ransom the rich cities of Florence and Rome, and they were determined to make the most of it. Charles V, the emperor who had hired these troops, was unaware of their true intentions. His own reverence for the papacy led him to grant his enemies an 8-month armistice in exchange for 60,000 ducats to be distributed among his troops. But the money was not enough to quell their hunger for loot and revenge. Enraged and feeling betrayed, the imperial army mutinied and set their sights on the capital of Christendom. On May 6, 1527, the imperial army broke through the defenses of Rome. The first to fall was the Constable de Bourbon, killed by a sniper on the Roman walls. His death marked the beginning of a catastrophic 8-month period of pillage, murder, and destruction. The mutineers, now leaderless and driven by their basest instincts, rampaged through the city, pillaging house after house, murdering anyone who stood in their way. Buildings were set ablaze, and the screams of the victims filled the air.
I mean, it was just, this video is not giving justice to what these guys did to Rome. So Pope Clement, they held him hostage. So when Henry VIII sends word to Rome for this annulment, Charles V tells him, look, you're not going to approve this annulment. So, in hindsight, I mean, this was a huge deal. This was a huge deal because nobody could have anticipated what Henry was going to do next. And the Protestant Reformation had been going on now for a decade. It had spread throughout all of Europe. It had spread, it was heresy basically. And people, at the same time that the printing press, had already, been invented in Germany, sometime in the 15th century. And so, but it started to be used more, in the 16th century, especially after the Protestant Reformation kicked off. People were translating the Bible out of Latin into, native languages like German, like English. And, this was considered a crime, but people were printing, the Bible in these native languages and distributing it, and also distributing, pamphlets and writings that were changing people's mind about the Catholic Church. And the Protestant Reformation was gaining a lot of power. It had a lot of power in England before Henry makes this move to separate England and the Church of England from the Catholic Church. But after word comes back from Rome and the Pope refuses to grant Henry the annulment, that's what he does. He separates from the Catholic Church, and he separates the Church of England from the Catholic Church, and the rest is history. This has a huge and profound effect on what happens in the New World and who these people are that establish these English colonies in the New World. It has a huge effect in England and in Europe itself. I mean, who knows how far the Protestant Reformation would have gone and how much it would have been able to accomplish without Henry making this move and separating, because he gave the Reformation national power for the first time, and it was huge. It was huge. Just to give you some insights about how huge this was, take for example William Tyndale. William Tyndale is a English reformer, the most esteemed of the English reformers during this time. And he is the one who was first to translate the Latin Bible into English. It says Tyndale's translations were the first English scriptures to draw directly from the Hebrew and Greek texts. The first English translation to take advantage of the printing press. The first of the New English Bibles of the Reformation all started with Tyndale. He's the first to translate and give us the English translation. I think this paragraph's really interesting. A copy of Tyndale's The Obedience of the Christian Man, which some view as arguing for Caesaropapism. Caesaropapism is the idea that the monarch, rather than the Pope, should control the country's church. So Tyndale is the one who authored this, The Obedience of the Christian Man, which they're saying here that Henry, here, let's see. So the Obedience of the Christian Man, which Tyndale wrote in 1528, arguing for Caesaropapism, the idea that the monarch, rather than the Pope, should control the country's church, came into the hands of King Henry, providing him a rationale for breaking the church in England away from the Catholic Church in 1534. So what this is saying is that this pamphlet that Tyndale wrote, it provided the logical, intellectual rationale for Henry breaking to the church. But if that's the case, it's really interesting because Henry hated Tyndale. Henry actually wanted to capture Tyndale and arrest him, and Tyndale ended up having to leave England. It says in 1530, Tyndale wrote the practice of prelates, opposing Henry's plan to, this is another pamphlet. So, all right, let me calm down. So this pamphlet, The Obedience of the Christian Man, is what gave Henry the idea that he could break away from the Catholic Church. But this other pamphlet that Tyndale wrote, The Practice of Prelates, this pamphlet opposed Henry's plan to seek an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon on the grounds that it contravened Scripture. So Henry was, he had a mixed, bag with Tyndale. He liked Tyndale because Tyndale gave him the rationale to break away from the Catholic Church, but he also didn't like Tyndale because Tyndale was criticizing him because he wanted to get an annulment. He was also against Tyndale because Tyndale was, when Henry was loyal to the church, he was angry at Tyndale for Tyndale attempting to translate the Bible into English. Freeing England, Tyndale sought refuge in Flemish territory of Catholic King Henry, King Henry V. Tyndale in 1535 was arrested and jailed in the castle of Filford outside of Brussels over a year. In 1536, he was convicted of heresy and executed by strangling, after which his body was burned at the stake. So that's how Tyndale died. But so Tyndale dies in 1536. 2 years before that is when Henry starts to separate the Church of England from the Catholic Church, and then just 3 years later, King Henry VIII commissions the Great Bible. I want to get over here where it talks about the Great Bible. Okay, so Tyndale's, this is very important. Tyndale's translation of biblical books were reused in subsequent English editions, often without his sectarian preface or annotations, including the Great Bible. The Great Bible was commissioned by King Henry VIII in 1539, and the Bishop's Bible authorized by the Church of England. In 1611, after 7 years of work with 47 scholars who produced the King James Version, we all know about the King James Version of the Bible, drew extensively from Tyndale's work and other translations descended from this. One estimate suggests that the New Testament of the King James Version is 83% of the work of Tyndale's work. So they took Tyndale's work to create the Great Bible and also even the King James Bible. So the Church of England, when King Henry VIII dies, is completely separate from the Catholic Church. This makes all of the nobles in England happy because all of the Catholic lands were seized by Henry and then redistributed to these nobles. And the nobles in England, they embrace Protestantism. They did not want to go back to Catholicism, although there would be several attempts to take England back to Catholicism. After Henry dies, his son with his third wife becomes king, Edward VI. But Edward VI, he does not live very long. And then when Edward dies, his sister from Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon's the one daughter that Catherine of Aragon was able to produce with Henry VIII. after Edward dies at a young age, Mary Tudor becomes the queen. And Mary Tudor is, they call her Bloody Mary, because she attempted to take England back to back to the Catholic Church. She was a diehard Catholic because she was the mother of Catherine of Aragon of Spain. She was loyal to Catholicism. She ends up marrying. So when Charles V, when he dies, he leaves Spain to his son, Philip II. Philip II is who takes charge of Spain after Charles V dies. Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry and Catherine of Aragon, they marry each other. Mary marries her cousin, the king of Spain at this time, Philip II. And then Mary ends up dying. And then after Mary dies, her sister from Henry's second wife, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth, becomes queen. And Elizabeth is one of the most powerful queens, one of the most powerful monarchs, one of the most transformative monarchs in the history of Europe. This is what blows my mind when people are talking about Kamala Harris losing the election and why can't we have a woman? It's time for a woman. You know? I was thinking to myself, guys, pick up a history book. There have been some powerful woman leaders, and then they'll say, well, not here in America. So, I mean, does it mean anything? That doesn't mean anything that just because we haven't had a woman president, there hasn't been the right woman to run for president. But there are some challenges with having a very powerful woman leader. And we're going to talk about, at least one of the things that Elizabeth did wrong. I believe she did wrong, but she was a great monarch. She allowed the Catholics to be Catholics. She didn't try to force the Catholics in the empire to abandon Catholicism. There wasn't, any Catholic churches really. Most of the churches were the Church of England. But if you wanted to embrace Catholicism, under Elizabeth, there was no big deal. She was a Protestant. The Church of England, she didn't, kept the Church of England in power because that's what the nobles wanted, and the nobles are the ones who supported her as queen. She had a lot of reforms. She allowed free speech as long as you didn't criticize her as a queen, and her reign and her personally. You could basically say anything. She was a modern reformer. It was under Elizabeth that Mary's husband and the son of Charles V, where he sends the Spanish Armada to take over England. And the Spanish Armada was a invincible army, an invincible fleet of ships that Philip II had sent to England to conquer England under Elizabeth. The only reason that this was not successful is because of the way that the winds were blowing. And man, so that Philip sent the Spanish Armada to England. And then the one thing that Elizabeth, even though her reign was great and it was the beginning of a great period for England under the Elizabethan reign. The one thing that she did not do, and the one criticism that historians have about her monarchy, is that she did not marry and she did not produce any children. And because she didn't marry and because she didn't produce any children, she didn't have an heir when she finally died, which death comes for us all. And then when she finally died, because she didn't leave an heir and didn't have any children, her cousin from Scotland, James the Fourth, James the First of England, he becomes the King of England. He's from Scotland. James. This is where the King James Bible comes from James. Jamestown, Virginia comes from James. Virginia, where's the name Virginia come from? Well, the name Virginia comes from Elizabeth. That's where the first colony in the United States was the Jamestown colony, and Jamestown is in the colony of Virginia, which became Virginia. Where does the name Virginia come from? Comes from Queen Elizabeth. It says right here, because she'd never married and she never had any children, there became this lore around her that she was a virgin. People just said because she never married, she never had any children, people just considered her a virgin for her whole life, when there's tons of evidence that she took lovers, that she was not a virgin. People considered her a virgin. As she grew older, Elizabeth became celebrated for her virginity. A cult of personality grew around her, which is celebrated in portraits, pageants, and literature of the day. Elizabeth's reign became known as the Elizabethan era. So she was the Virgin Queen. People were celebrating her and calling her a virgin, and that's where the name Virginia comes from the Virgin Queen. Virginia, first state, first colony, Virginia, is named after the Virgin Queen. The first colony in the Americas, the first English colony, was called Jamestown, and it was named after James. If you notice here, James, he starts his reign in 1603, the beginning of the 17th century that James starts his reign. At the same time James is starting his reign, in the early 1600s, you have all of these different joint stock companies that are coming about. And what is a joint stock company? Well, this is the beginning of the stock market and shareholding and sharing risk. A lot of these nobles had tons of money and they wanted to invest their money and grow their money. They saw what Spain was doing and all the wealth that Spain was bringing back from the New World, because they had already colonized, Mexico and South and Central America. They were bringing back all this gold from Bolivia. So some of these other regions wanted to get in on the game, but they didn't have the same amount of money as Ferdinand and Isabella when they, put all the money up to send Columbus on his first voyage. They put all that money up, Ferdinand and Isabella. So just think about if the Nina Pinta and the Santa Maria sink in the middle of the ocean and the king and queen of Spain have invested all this money, they lose all that money because they're the only ones that put it up. So in these other regions of Europe, in the Netherlands, in England, they got the idea that, why don't we sell shares of these companies and these companies that are going out and looking for wealth. And then, if they sink, then, we don't have to bear all of the risk because we have shares. Then we don't have to bear, all of the risk. And then, of course, that when the profits come back and we start getting revenue from this, then we just pay it out in shares. So whatever shares you bought, then, that's what you get of the profit. This is the beginning of the stock market. And these are called joint stock companies, companies like the East Indian Company. You had the British East Indian Company, the Dutch East Indian Company, but the Virginia Company was a company. The the first colony in the Americas that was established by King James in 1606 was a joint stock company that had brought together all of these investors to send this mission out and to colonize the New World, and to whatever profit they got, if it was discovering gold, if it was what ends up happening is they end up planting and first with tobacco and then with cotton. All that profit from those ventures, it comes back and it's distributed through the shareholders. So Virginia was a company, and the Virginia colony comes from the Virginia Company, which was a joint stock company. I have a little clip here about joint stock companies.
Some of the most significant early colonies, including Jamestown, Roanoke, and Massachusetts Bay, were founded by corporations called joint stock companies.
Joint stock companies were sort of rudimentary corporations, and the distinctive thing about English colonization is that the government did not have the means or the inclination to fund it.
So corporations raised money by selling stocks. Investors would be rewarded with gold and natural resources found in the New World.
So the king or queen would give a charter to one of these companies to go out and found a colony and give them monopoly control then over the region where that colony was to be. And sometimes the queen would actually contribute as a private investor. She would contribute a ship or something like that. But the government was not going to do this. And so it's all done by private enterprise.
So this is the beginning of the corporation. This is the beginning of the investment for profit. And the Virginia colony was created for profit, as an investment for profit. That's what the Virginia colony, which started with Jamestown, that's what it was created for. It was created for profit. I want you to take a listen to this clip. There were seven. The Roanoke or colony that they just mentioned was the first one. They sent about 120, all men. They all pretty much die. Then they send 500 more men and women. All died, but 60 in this period called the starving time. And this is a clip about the third mission to Virginia that actually stabilizes the colony, and it's a functioning colony after this third mission. Take a listen.
But what Ralph finds at the English settlement of Jamestown is hell on earth. More than 500 settlers made the journey before Ralph.
Hello? Hello?
Barely 60 remain. It's called the starving time.
Having fed on horses and other animals, we ate boots, shoes, and any other leather we came across.
3 months before Ralph arrives, a man is burned at the stake for killing his pregnant wife and planning to eat her. The English arrive unprepared for this new world and unwilling to perform manual labor. Instead of livestock, they brought chemical tests for gold that they never find. And this is not their land. They build Jamestown in the middle of a Native American empire. 60 starving settlers among 20,000 of the Powhatan Nation, armed with bows and arrows that are up to 9 times faster to reload and fire than an English musket. They're soon enemies. Only 1 in 10 of the original settlers is left. John Rolfe didn't come to plunder and leave like the others. He's got his own plan. There's money in tobacco, and England is addicted. He's arrived with a supply of South American tobacco seeds, but growing it is limited to the Spanish colonies. The Spanish control the worldwide trade. Selling tobacco seeds to foreigners is punishable by death.
All right, so they start growing tobacco in Virginia. That's the first cash crop in Virginia, and that starts the Virginia colony. Very different from the Plymouth colony. We're going to talk about the Plymouth colony on Friday and how different that colony was and what the roots of that colony were. One last thing that I want to say before we go, I want to talk about James, who took the English throne after Elizabeth. James is from Scotland, and his mother was Mary, Queen of Scots. And Mary, Queen of Scots, was a Roman Catholic, and she was loyal to the Roman Catholic Church. And when Henry separated the English church from the Catholic Church in Scotland, that angered Mary because she was as loyal to the Catholic Church as Catherine of Aragon. So the biggest influence on James, when James became the King of England after Elizabeth died, was his mother. But James couldn't turn England back to Catholicism at that time, even though he may have secretly wanted to, because during the reign of Elizabeth, the Protestant movement and the Church of England had become too powerful. It was impossible for him to turn it back. But there is some who believe that James secretly wanted to turn England back to the Catholic Church. Something really interesting that I think is interesting is that Maryland and Virginia, these two colonies were founded by James and then James's son, Charles. And if you notice that Washington, D.C. is nestled in the bosom of the Virgin Mary. Now, who is Maryland? Maryland, the colony of Maryland. Who's Maryland named after? Maryland is named after Henrietta Maria. And Henrietta Maria was the wife, the French Catholic wife of Charles I. And Charles I is the heir of James I of Scotland and of England. And Charles I becomes the King of England after James dies. And Charles I, James had married his son off to the Catholic French queen, Mariana, or Henrietta Maria. And during the reign of Charles I is when the English Civil War happens. And the English Civil War happens because Charles was married to Henrietta Maria, who was Catholic. That starts, so this guy is beheaded. They cut this guy's head off in England. And they cut his head off because he was connected and they believed he was trying to take England back to the Catholic Church. They behead this guy. They behead this guy almost a century before Louis XVI is beheaded in France during the French Revolution. And the tones of the French Revolution in the 18th century, late 18th century, and what the Jacobites and what they're complaining about during the French Revolution is not only the monarchy, but the Catholic Church is all. So 100 years before what is going on in France goes on in France, it's happening in England. And they're beheading the king in England 100 years before Louis XVI in France is beheaded. Anyway, I'm going to get back into this in the next podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it. I have a lot more history to get to. We're going to get to the Plymouth colony in the next podcast. We're going to talk about the Mayflower Compact. I have a lot to share with you guys, and I'll see you guys on Friday. Have a happy Thanksgiving.